right, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are listening to the Nick and Joe Show. It is March the 31st, the last day of March in the year 2021. I'm here in the studio, and I know Nick is going to ask me to say it, so I'm going to say it anyway. Now I can't remember what I was going to say. The Think Radio Broadcast Center, live from the Think Radio Broadcast Center in Canada's national capital, Ottawa. Right? I got it there, Nick. Nick's on the farm. Nick, are you there? Calling?
Yes, I am.
Calling Nick. Oh, okay.
You told me to be quiet, so I was just waiting.
Okay, well, we're going to have a little bit of latency for tonight's show, ladies and gentlemen. So bear with us, but the quality of connection's not bad, but just every now and then, as I said, we get just a little bit of latency. And so we never know when it's either we're talking over one another or we're both being quiet, waiting for the other person to say something.
Big pregnant pauses.
Pregnant pauses. And, if you're listening to the podcast, you probably aren't hearing any of that stuff because, we can clean that up when we do, post-production processing. So that's a pretty technical term to use, post-production processing. The 3 Ps.
I tell you what, that's more of a mouthful.
Isn't it, though?
And for all of those hockey fans who care about the sport, I will let you know that Toronto is beating Winnipeg 2-0.
Okay.
Like, that's vital. Zach Hyman scored, and so did Austin Matthews. There you go. Okay, now, because we could have a lot of fun with that, but
we
tomorrow,
could.
And we weren't thinking ahead far enough. We were too busy trying to get rid of the show. Seriously, the fun we could have had with an April Fool's joke, but because tomorrow, of course, is the day of the jester or April Fool's. And if you have time tomorrow morning, don't forget Nick, go to tomorrow morning. We had a blast, but we didn't think of it in time. So
tomorrow morning, go to hang on, is it Bulldog? Let me just check the address, okay? I just want to check if it's hang on. All right, I'm looking up now. BulldogOttawa.com. I think is the address. I've just typed it in. Yes. Okay. So go to BulldogOttawa.com tomorrow for an important announcement from former Mayor Larry O'Brien. There you go. Okay.
Okay.
And I'm not going to give you any more than that. So...
I'm afraid I know what you're going to say. I know it's going to be there.
Okay, well, so we'll just let it be.
I'm not going to spoil it.
I'm not going to spoil anything.
We'll leave it there.
We're going to leave it there.
I will admit it. It would be, we'll leave it there.
Okay, so...
On another issue, one that actually matters.
I guess I should clarify. I really should clarify. Sorry, Nick, for interrupting, but, now that I said that, I realize that I don't know that the announcement or the video that they're broadcasting tomorrow is going to be up, into next week for various politically correct reasons. So let's just say that, if you're listening to the podcast, if it's Thursday morning, April 1st, make sure you go to BulldogOttawa, all one word, .com. And if it's past April 1st, then you may have missed the boat. So I just thought I'd better clarify that for our podcast listeners. Anyway, housekeeping. If you want to participate in the chat live, in the show live, in our chat room, click on the chat bubble on the player, and you may have to register or log in, one or the other, if you're already registered, and that's to ensure that you're a real flesh and blood human being, not some sort of a robot, a liberal robot, we'll say that. And, other than that, keep the comments coming. We had a red-hot chat room last week. It was, we never know from one week to the next what's going to happen, Nick.
No, it's very, very eclectic, first of all. Because some nights they're following exactly what we're talking about, making comments about it. And other nights it takes on a life of its own and goes in a completely different direction. And you're watching the chat in the chat room going, are they even listening?
That's right. We're the background
But you know,
noise.
it's almost like its own little subculture, right?
Yeah,
we're the background noise. You know, you put a radio on and you have elevator music in the background or some, very quietly playing piece of music. That's us. Anyway,
right. Well,
be that as it may.
Yeah, let's get into some of these subjects, Nick, because we have a little bit of ground to cover tonight. So the first topic we were talking about, and I don't know how this came up. Nick was looking at this, and he had an idea in his head that we should talk about it, and it's actually, I think, worthwhile. It's a worthwhile discussion to have, and that is the whole subject of school funding. And in particular, we live in the province of Ontario in Canada, where the Constitution actually requires that the provincial government fund Catholic schools. And so the provincial government has been doing that, since Confederation. At least they were funding elementary level education. And then, I want to say 25, 30, maybe as long as 30 years ago, although I don't think it was quite that long, but let's say it might have been actually about 30 years ago. Bill Davis was the Premier of Ontario, and one of the final things he did before he retired as Premier and leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, which was the governing party in Ontario at the time, one of the last things he did was to extend public funding to Catholic schools to cover high school education as well. It was controversial at the time, and it was particularly controversial, Nick, because the provincial government doesn't provide any kind of financial support, any meaningful financial support to any other denominational school. They dabbled in some tax credits under Mike Harris, and then when Dalton McGuinty became the premier after the Harris government. Well, Mike retired, and then the party lost an election. So when the Liberals came in under Dalton McGuinty, the first thing he canceled was tax credits for denominational schools. Feel free to jump in any time, Nick, because I know this was a subject you brought up.
Well,
you're Catholic, so I don't know how this affects you, or I'm not even sure how it came up today.
Well, okay, let me tell you how I stumbled across the conversation over on Facebook. Now, you know me, I don't ever get involved in Facebook chats.
No, not you, not ever.
I know, that's right. But I broke the oft-broken golden rule, and that is somebody was talking about going to a one funding model for ceasing the funding for Catholic education and putting it all into public. And I said, well, my comment was, well, if you want to get rid of Catholic funding, if you're going to get rid of funding for one of the school systems, then it would make sense to get rid of the public one, because that doesn't perform as well as the Catholic system does. It's why the Catholic system, set the religious side aside for a minute, although that's pretty watered down by, standards of 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's many schools are Catholic in name only. They're not really institutions of faith and learning the way they used to be. Now it's more learning with a little dash of faith in there once in a while. But anyway, the point is that I got involved in this conversation. We started to debate the idea of which system would be better. And I said, look, I have 8 kids. They've been through the education system, the Catholic education system. We've homeschooled. They've gone on to post-secondary. A lot of my kids have gone on to post-secondary and so on. And I'm of the opinion that the best way to go about dealing with this, because it is a constitutional requirement, you're quite right. And the thing to keep in mind is constitutional change very seldom happens. And whenever they try it, it turns into a dog's breakfast, because the moment you open it, somebody says, well, since we're here, why don't we? And then it all falls apart. You can look at Meech Lake. You can look at a bunch of other examples, the Charlottetown Accord, those kinds of things where they got nowhere. The closest we've ever had in my lifetime to any kind of adjustment, and it's not even that, was when Trudeau brought the charter home and promptly spilt red ink on it. And no matter what they tried, they couldn't get rid of it. But I said I would prefer to go with a voucher system and let parents decide what's the best education system for their children, and let the school systems compete for those educational dollars. So the government still meets its mandate of funding the school systems, but at the same time, ultimately, the people responsible for the education of their children, the parents, have the final say in where their kids go. And I think I can't think of a better way to go about it, which is why it'll probably never happen. But that's where it all came from. And the idea of having school vouchers in place gives parents the most amount of authority and freedom to educate the kids the way they the way they think they should be educated.
Well, I'm a fan of school vouchers. I will say this, back shortly after the provincial government decided to extend funding to Catholic high schools, I was part of a coalition of parents and representatives from various private Jewish schools that came together and to lobby the government to extend funding beyond Catholic schools to include other denominations. And there was some litigation around this. In fact, a friend of mine spearheaded a case that went before the United Nations Human Rights Committee, and the Human Rights Committee actually ruled that the Canadian government, by allowing Ontario to do this, notwithstanding the fact that it was written in the Constitution, was in fact committing some religious discrimination. And they said that the Canadian government had to do something about it. And, of course, the Canadian government didn't do anything about it. So, whatever. But the idea was to extend funding. I have to say, I think that the idea of funding one religious group over another, I continue to think it's unfair. But I'm not entirely sure that my feelings haven't evolved on the question of public funding for private denominational schools. And, 25 years ago, when all of this stuff was happening, Nick, education and what was going on in the schools was fundamentally different from what's happening now. And today, there's so little education and so much social engineering and social indoctrination that I'm not entirely sure that I would support today if it was put in front of me, all other things being equal, just plain and simple, government funding denominational schools. Now, I don't have any children in the school system anymore. Our kids are all grown up. We have younger children in the school system, these concerns remain the same. But, getting back to just a simple question of funding, do we want government dollars to be going into our denominational schools, our religious schools, given the strings that are attached these days and what you may or may not be expected to do in order to continue to qualify for that funding? And of course, once you've got that money in place, it's really, really hard to walk away from it in the future, because, you become a little lazy. You're not out there beating the bushes. So it's I just one more point, Nick. If I just let me make one more point, and